Senhoras,
Ladies,
senhores,
gentlemen,
queridas irmãs,
dear sisters,
queridos irmãos espíritas,
dear brothers in a spiritist ideal,
amigas e amigos
friends
que nos acompanham
who follow
através
us
dos veículos de informação,
through the media channels,
nossos votos de muita paz.
our most sincere wishes for peace.
O notável psicólogo russo
The renowned Russian psychologist
Ouspensky,
Pedro Ouspensky,
discípulo de Gurdjieff,
Gurdjieff's follower,
fazendo um estudo da sociedade contemporânea
carrying out a study on the contemporary society,
em dois grandes
divided us
grupos.
up into two large
O
groups.
primeiro deles
The first
foi
one
denominado como o grupo
was called the
de
group
pessoas fisiológicas,
of physiological people,
aquelas
those
que vivem
who
as
live
sensações básicas
the basic
da boca
sensations
para baixo.
from the mouth down.
Alimentam-se,
They eat,
dormem,
sleep,
praticam sexo.
and practice
E
sex.
aquelas outras,
And those
que
others
nada obstante
who, despite keeping
essas manifestações basilares,
these elemental manifestations, also
são
love.
portadoras de ideais.
They are holders of ideals.
Pela felicidade.
They aspire
Na
to happiness.
linguagem kardeciana,
In Kardec's parlance,
realizam
they carry out
desenvolvimento intelecto-moral,
intellectual moral development,
da humanidade.
fostering the progress of humanity.
Asseverava então
Asserted then Pedro Ouspensky,
grande companheiro de Gurdjieff,
Gurdjieff's great companion,
que o número das pessoas fisiológicas,
that the amount of physiological people is significant.
chegando quase a 80%
It almost
da
amounts
população terrestre,
to 80% of the Earth's population,
enquanto que as pessoas psicológicas,
while the psychological
aquelas
people,
que são constituídas também
those who are also constituted by higher emotions,
uma
form
média de 15
an average of 15 to
e
20%.
que são esses indivíduos
And those
que
individuals
proporcionam progresso,
are the ones who provide
ajudam no
progress,
desenvolvimento moral,
help in the moral development,
para minimizar as vicissitudes
and work to minimize the vicissitudes and naturally make the human being happy and truly whole.
mas para que façamos parte
But for us to be
das
part
pessoas
of the group
psicológicas,
of psychological people,
aquelas que temos as sensações basilares,
having the basic sensations and also love,
indispensável
it is
o
essential.
desenvolvimento da consciência.
The development of the
Na
consciousness,
psicologia
which in psychology
capítulo muito
was
difícil
a very difficult
de ser
chapter
interpretado pelos estudiosos.
to be interpreted by the scholars.
Coube a Carl Gustav Jung,
It was up to Carl Gustav
década de
Jung
1950,
in the decade of 1950 to 1960
dar-nos uma ideia
to give us an
da
idea
consciência
about
do
consciousness
seu ponto de vista.
from his point of view.
Ele narra
He narrates
no seu retrato autobiográfico
from his self-biographical portrait that one day
ele sentiu algo que o segurou pelo cogote,
he felt something that held him by the neck,
como se
textual
fosse um
words,
espírito
as if it were a spirit who
a
took him
escrever interminantemente
to write
durante
non-stop
3 dias
during
e
3
3
days
noites.
and 3 nights.
Nesse período em que ele esteve em semitranse,
During this period when he was in a state of semi-trance,
na obra
he wrote a short book which he named
Resposta a Job.
Answer to Job.
Job é
Job
aquela personagem mitológica da Bíblia
is that mythological character from the Bible who, having succeeded,
por Deus,
was tried by God
citação do espírito do mal,
as asked by the
para
evil
que pudesse
spirit
testá-lo,
to test him
a fim de verificar se ele seria fiel
in order to verify if he would be faithful in the expiation as much as he was devoted in the abundance.
admirável.
And in this remarkable book,
Refere-se
Jung
que a
asserts
criatura humana atinge o seu nível de consciência,
that the human creature reaches the level of consciousness
toma
when the
conhecimento
ego
dos seus conteúdos
becomes aware of its psychic
é que vale
contents.
dizer
It means
E é naquele momento quando nós descobrimos
it's in that moment when we find out
fazer e podemos,
what we must do and can
o
do,
que podemos fazer e devemos.
what we can do and must do.
Porque nem tudo que nós podemos fazer
Because not all we can do,
realizar.
we must put into
Da
practice.
mesma forma que nem tudo que nós devemos
And likewise, not all we must do,
podemos executar.
we can execute.
O momento da consciência, portanto,
The moment of consciousness, therefore,
discernimento.
is this discernment between good and evil.
E Allan Kardec, o egrégio codificador
And Allan Kardec, the distinguished coder of the
dessa
Spiritism
dicotomia
doctrine,
de natureza
on this
sociocultural,
social philosophical dichotomy,
perguntou às entidades venerantes
asked the venerable spirits, what is good?
e os espíritos nobres.
And the noble spirits replied,
É tudo aquilo conforme a lei
it's
de Deus.
everything that agrees with the law of
É
God.
tudo aquilo que
And what's
se
evil? It's everything
opõe
that opposes
à lei
it.
de Deus,
And what agrees with the law of God?
que se encontra
Everything that is found carved in the statute of love.
É,
Love
portanto,
is therefore
a expressão mais elevada
the most elevated expression
código universal
of the universal
da
code
misericórdia divina
from the divine mercy
para todo o cosmos,
to the whole cosmos
naturalmente,
and naturally
para as criaturas humanas.
to the human being.
Todos os seres,
All beings,
e em especial os seres
and especially the animal
uma
beings,
que outra exceção,
with a few exceptions,
trazem as marcas dos
bring the
instintos
mark of the basic instincts,
e é principalmente uma característica
and mainly a feature,
do aparelho genésico.
the reproduction system.
Sexo
Sex
faz parte da vida.
is part of life.
Embora haja reprodução
Although
assexual,
there is a sexual
é
reproduction,
comum observar
it's easy to
o
observe
sexo
that
é um
sex
dos departamentos orgânicos
is one of the organic areas of the utmost relevance in the animal kingdom.
Coube a Sigmund Freud,
It was up to
o
Sigmund
notado
Freud,
pai da psicanálise,
the remarkable father of psychoanalysis,
sexo,
to find
e
sex
dele retirar os tabus,
and from it extracts the taboos,
castrações religiosas,
the religious repressions,
os mitos,
the myths,
para demonstrar
to demonstrate
que o ser humano,
that the human
na
being,
sua acepção pessimista,
in his pessimistic sense,
nada possui
nothing has of
de
divine.
animal sexual.
It's a sexual animal.
E esse animal sexual transita
And this sexual animal
entre
transits
duas pulsões,
between two drives, Eros and Thanatos.
Eros
Eros
seria a representação mitológica
would be the Greek
bíblica
mythological
do amor.
depiction of love,
Cupido,
the Cupid,
ele vai colocar
which he will take as being the libido. Thanatos is the
a
death,
desintegração,
disintegration, the torment,
a sede implacável,
the merciless thirst, this
que é
need
mais da mente
that is more of the mind than it is of the body,
resultado do uso
result of
que
the
se
use
aplica
that's
à
applied
organização
to the
reprodutiva.
reproduction system.
Dessa maneira,
This way,
a partir
since
do eminente mestre
this
da
distinguished master from the University of Vienna,
deixou
sex
de ser algo proibitivo,
ceased to be something prohibitive, negative, filthy, sinful,
para ser uma função
to
orgânica,
become an organic function
através da qual o
through
prazer,
which pleasure constitutes a moment of ecstasy
a fim de nos ajudar
in order to help
no
us
processo
in the
da
process of
reprodução.
reproduction.
A tradição,
The tradition,
através de alguns teólogos frustrados,
according to some frustrated theologians,
profundamente cheios de conflito,
deeply full of conflicts,
havia estabelecido que
had
o
established
exercício sexual,
that the sexual exercise, and until today,
algumas doutrinas
in some Orthodox doctrines,
deveria ser condenado,
should be condemned
porque se trata de um
because
exercício imundo.
it's about a filthy exercise. And nonetheless,
O apóstolo Paulo,
Paul the Apostle,
na sua carta número 14,
in his letter
aos
number
Romanos,
14 to the Romans,
versículo 14,
verse 14,
assevera com propriedade
asserts with
que
property
uma
that
coisa
something
somente é imunda
is filthy only to those who have a filthy
para
mind.
esse,
To those,
aquilo é imundo.
that is filthy.
Referia-se Paulo às abluções,
Paul was referring to the
à
ablutions,
necessidade dos cuidados com a
the
higiene,
need of hygiene before the meals,
mas
but it's
por uma extensão perfeitamente compreensível.
perfectly understandable
A questão da imundícia,
that the issue of
a
filthiness,
questão do pecado,
the matter of the sin,
a questão que se opõe
the
à
point
função
that
sexual
opposes to the sexual
dentro dos
function
padrões
from within
da consciência,
the standards of the consciousness, The right doing, the duty,
naturalmente,
is naturally
resultado do transtorno
the result of the disorder of addicted minds.
sexual
The sexual function
das belas características,
is one of the beautiful characteristics of the animal being,
particularmente do ser humano,
and particularly of the human being. We can say
ela constitui
that it constitutes
gerador de alegria,
of the dynamo,
de transtorno,
producer of happiness, disorders, joy, conflicts,
de plenitude,
of wholeness, and also
nos de
of
natureza
dysfunction of emotional nature.
grande número
A great number
portadores
of
do
holders
transtorno neurótico
of the neurotic disorder, depressive, bipolar, from the area of affectivity, have their roots in the sexual function and sexual conflict. It was up to the Spiritist doctrine,
libertando
freeing us from ignorance, and demonstrating that all functions we have at our disposal have their main basic and dignifying purposes
significantes
in seeing sex as so normal, so noble,
nobre
and so sanctified by the function it executes of perpetuating the species through reproduction, and the pleasure that the divinity has adorned it is for love to be above the libido's urge, above the physiologic need, the impulse, and that it may be characterized by kindness, the affability, the before, the during, and the after. It has always caught my attention from the cinematography of today and of the past, when people after their 60s, in the past century and millennium, started to free themselves from the sexual taboos and erase from the pages of biology the mythic fantasies in which babies were carried by storks, were born in cabbages, and etc., into the idea that sex was something undignified, that could not even be uttered. I was born in a modest family. My father was from the 19th century, and their traditions were very rigorous. The word sex meant sheer immorality, because soon it took the individual to the vile conceptions of the insensible and animal interchange that exists among the promiscuous beings, holders of conduct disorder. This is the environment in which I was raised. Having professed the religion that was mostly popular in our town, which we respect a lot, the Catholic religion, I saw sex as a punitive form of divinity. And when God conceived me the bless of entering through the beautiful ocean of the Spiritist doctrine, soon to my juvenile mind, the sex issue began to take tormented aspects. Once I knew Allan Kardec's work, which I had had the opportunity to read from the Spiritist book, the basic work, and then the medium's book, to understand the conflicts, the paranormal disturbance of which I was the object, that the sexual function plays a fundamental role in the moral development of the individual and his or her paraphysical faculties. God, having conceived me the honor, which I recognize not to deserve, of meeting the true apostle of mediumship, Francisco Cândido Xavier, in March of 1948 in Belo Horizonte, soon I started to wonder how this man, who had sublimated his sexual functions, could live jovially, single, with a life as transparent as a beam of sunlight, with the dignity and the kindness that were his basic characteristics, and yet naturally experiencing the presence of the thorn in the flesh. This expression I had extracted from the biography of Paul the Apostle, the young Saulo, dreamer, and dedicated to the biblical scholarship. He who had been a rabbi and had given his life to the Mosaic law, waiting in chastity for the right moment to procreate through marriage, suddenly is taken by the whirlwind of conflicts that overwhelm him and becomes Jesus' opponent. But because Jesus is the ineffable love and the personification of the divine mercy, he searches for him in the blazing sands of the desert and summons him for the sublime task of the apostleship of dissemination. And the young man from Tarsus, who would later adopt the Latin name of Paul, keep the dignity and chastity to be able to be faithful to Jesus' teachings and predicate love without neither the torment of the libido nor the conduct deviation disguised by hypocrisy. But he would have one day the opportunity to say, I have the thorn in the flesh. It's natural that the venerable theologians tried to interpret what would be the thorn in the flesh of that overwhelmed man, who once more had offered himself to the Holocaust of love, risking his own life to demonstrate the excellency of the Master's message and the strength of the resurrection. What would be this thorn in the flesh? And in my childishness, joviality, or naivete, I began to think that in his condition of human being, he too was a holder of the sexual conflict. No matter how devoted he was to Jesus, the matter has its impulses, its functions, its urges. And it's just logical that he would feel conscious and unconscious impulses in a state of lucidity, in the oniric moments, and many times embarrassed or not being able to overcome that would be a temptation in the theological tradition, the temptation of the flesh. Then I believed that he had his young body ravishing, that he would take to the sacrifice to exhaust him the excess of strength, that thorn, like myself, like any youth, carried the thorn in the flesh. And thanks to the prohibitions, the castrations, the ancestral impositions to which I had adapted, through an unbeatable will, I imposed it to keep me faithful to the doctrine postulates as much as it was possible to me. It's at this time that I meet the venerable Apostle Xavier, and having hugged him in Belo Horizonte on an unforgettable Tuesday afternoon, when he pops in, coming from Pedro Leopoldo, to visit a very dear family to him in the capital city. There, beside us, there were old and venerable friends like Martin Peralva, Ederlindo Sá Roriz, Arnaldo Rocha, and I see him hopping out of the automobile, and bedazzled, I see his charismatic figure, his tender look, in the local way of greeting. He goes around hugging one by one in a semicircle, bedazzled with his arrival. And when he came close to me, he held my hand and said, "Hello, Divaldo." I didn't pass out because I didn't remember to. He knew me, and we had never seen each other before. And bewildered, I asked him, "Chico, how do you know that I am me?" What a deep question. He then said to me, "Come and hold my wing, my son, and we will take a long trip. We'll talk a lot." It was the beginning, or restart, of an affection that has been adorning my life of blessings, of memories, of guidelines that are never going to fade. After that unforgettable experience, he, having to say farewell to come back to the tiny Pedro Leopoldo, told me, on Friday and Saturday, we have activities. I would pretty much like to have you over if you don't have any commitments. And I didn't, thank God. I would be very happy to have you, Divaldo. Go there so we can talk. My God, I had never seen such a distance between Tuesday and Friday as on that day. No matter how much I anticipated, time wouldn't pass. Because when we wait, as the little prince said so properly, if you say you come at 4, I wait for you since 2. So when we are waiting, it seems that time goes by much longer on purpose. And when we're happy, time seems to fly just to tease us. So finally Friday came and we set off. There were 4 friends with me, so we were 5. Then we went to have lunch at his sister's place, Miss Luisa, also a unique soul. She was one of the affectionate angels next to the Apostle Xavier. We were all sitting at the table, and my mind boiled with questions and conflicts because of my shyness. How could I ask Chico something about sex, this immorality? My God, what would he think of me? However, there wasn't much need for concern, because he had become a great server. He was the one who served us jovially and abundantly, believed we had to eat well, so the machine could perform the tasks for which it was designed. And while we feasted, he would talk to us non-stop. He narrated luminous experiences. He would talk about this and that, but my mind was going crazy, like, what about sex? How do you live, Chico? For Christ's sake, free me. Because this sex is not in the reproduction organs, but it's in my mind. And I felt like the dirtiest being on the face of the earth. Of course, I was not thinking about sex as the act. I just didn't know how to behave. What was the healthiest conduct to stay chaste? To keep the purity of the feelings. He would look at me from time to time and laughed, and I thought to myself, this must be some kind of sadism, because he must be catching my thoughts and doesn't say anything. After lunch, we all walked out, and there was this exuberant, fully bloomed orange tree that released fragrances from under an ocean of green leaves. The immaculate white flower was a blessing from God, and ushering me to his house that was connected to Miss Luisa and Miss Lindolfo's by the patio, he stopped me before that gorgeous orange tree and its unique seasoned perfume, and pulled a small bunch as to break it off and hand me. Unfortunately, I was too presumptuous, and I thought, oh, he's going to give me the flower. But no, he didn't. He just held it and said to me, everything in nature is a sexual function. I was awestruck. He said, André Luiz is saying that these plant's roots, which spread inside the intimacy of the inorganic chemistry underground, is the result of a sexual function in which water becomes wood, the fertilizer becomes life, and here we are with the flower and the fruit. And during 40 minutes non-stop, he presented an approach about sexuality, of the sexual function, to the astonishment of the 5 of us, who were mesmerized. And he said that sex is a blessing from God, as the stomach and the lungs, the same way as the organ of sensitiveness, this organ that pulses, since 20 days after fertilization and never stops, teaching us a lesson about the work that must be unstoppable. When it stops, it's time to return to the spiritual world. I tried to memorize every single word, impregnated with the perfume, with the scent of what he was saying. Get rid of the taboos, let myself free of the prejudice that chained me in ignorance. And he spoke and spoke until that after this long moment, he let go of the flowered white bunch, laid his hand on my shoulder and smiled and said, "This is André Luiz's answer to your questions, my son." Then hugged me and took me to the intimacy of his home. He went to work, and that night, after the usual activities, late at night on Saturday, when we were about to go to sleep, he asked me, "So, are you more tranquil?" And I said, "I am really more enlightened. However, I'm not tranquil." "And why not?" "Because André Luiz said everything, but he didn't mention how I am supposed to behave to proceed well and to be whole, without any conflict, which, by the way, is impossible on earth, but at least without the torments that the sexual drive brings to the young." I was 20 years old, an exuberant physiological organization. Although I didn't practice the academic exercise, I was a hard worker that needed some guidance to safety, to put sex in the reproductive organs and the thoughts on God's mercy. Then he smiled and asked me, "Would you like me to tell you my personal experience?" And then I held my jaw as to stop it from dropping and said, "It's exactly what I wished for." We sat down and he said, "We all go through conflicts. When I was young," and here comes the kind soul of Chico Xavier, "Oh, my son, when I got to this period of turbulence, when the pineal gland starts to produce some of the sexual hormones, I got so cheerful you wouldn't believe. I always have a calm temperament." And I nodded as I myself had a calm temperament. But when the bonfire was set on fire, I was jumping, although the appearance was of serenity. And many times I didn't know what to do. I was aware of the moral hygiene that I should apply to my sexual function. And many times on Sundays, I would go into the woods of Pedro Leopoldo and shout it. And one day Emmanuel told me, "If you want caress, hug the trees." I wanted another kind of caress, not necessarily hug a vegetable, but he said, "Hold the trees, and you will be able to receive a prana, the emanations of the chlorophyll." So I held the trees and said, "My God, I cannot stand anymore. Have mercy of me, sister tree." And the tree couldn't do much. One day, the beloved benefactor asked me, "What's your problem, Chico Xavier?" "My problem, my brother, well, is everybody's problem. How am I supposed to behave to keep myself healthy? I'm not married. I don't have any girlfriend." Those were the wonderful times when you had a girlfriend. You would date for about 40 years, get married at the age of 60, and at their 70s they both died. Now, things have changed. My grandchildren tell me, "No, Grandy, those are the times of the dinosaurs. Now it's here I am, and here I go." "Where to, my son?" "Anywhere, but I've come and gone already." And I asked, "But nobody dates anymore?" "Yes, we say hello and goodbye." and this is the time the date lasts. And I said, but this must be so fast. He said, it's faster than you think. So fast we don't ever remember each other. Not him, not her. And do you ask each other's names? No, grandfather. No time for that. It's like that. Come and go. But in those times, there was dating. It was so beautiful. And my parents had an even more beautiful date because once they could not talk, they would throw flowers. Look how romantic. The man would take a basket of flowers and the woman stood at the window and he would hold out a rose, saying, I love you like this flower. Then she would hold a carnation. Enjoy life, dear soul. So Chico told me, Emmanuel told me, let me tell you a story, Chico. There was a king who lived in a precious place. His kingdom was made of blessings. Everything in it flourished. The joy was immense. He ruled the whole kingdom with wisdom and property. The years passed by. His barns were fully supplied, and everybody there was happy. Suddenly, there started to be a change in the kingdom, and he summoned his ministers and said he found some disturbances here and there in the middle of the crowd. And an old wise counselor told him, Master, it's necessary to dialogue with the people, but I'm the king. I don't need to dialogue with anybody. Master, the people are very demanding, and there can never be anything worse than the hunger. But hunger in my kingdom, my barns are full for my troops, so we can defend ourselves from the enemies, from those who show up on the borders. I need to take care of these people's safety. And the old man said, but the people are hungry, and hunger doesn't have character. When the stomach yells, the feelings get perverted, the mind gets obliterated, and the feeling takes over. But the king didn't take it seriously. The situation started to get worse and worse. The king started to experience uneasiness, and one day, while he feasted with the court, a daring stone broke the window pane and fell onto the king's table. It was the crowd who had broken into the garden and that clamored for bread, needed wheat, was thirsty, was hungry, was in trouble. Then the king got scared and the wise minister said, Your Majesty, I had already warned you. The climax was coming. The crowd is invading the palace and will take yours and the royal family's lives. But what must I do? Go to the window and talk to the people who riot. But they will stone me to death. That's right. But this is the risk your Majesty needs to take. Come closer to the window. And there, from the windowsill, tell them about your difficulties. Tell the people that it's not easy to be a king. To rule is a challenge. It's a sacred mission, very difficult. But the people won't give me a chance. But the responsibility is fully yours, Your Majesty. Go. The king rose somehow tormented, opened the window, and the crowd unloaded a boo. He asked for silence, kept himself serene, and somebody shouted, let's listen what he has to say, this pervert who has decreed our death through hunger. Let's listen to what he has to say. Then he started to say, don't think that I am as happy as I look. Of course, on my table, the bread abounds. Of course, I'm not lacking food. But my nights are not slept. I think about my people. I dedicate myself hours and hours to find the best solutions. I know my barns are full of for the troops, to try to keep the peace, avoiding war. But I understand your situation. I will see that some barns are open to treat you with food. but use the food with tranquility. Try to be conscious. All waste takes to poverty. And he talked and talked, and the mass applauded, and there was peace in the kingdom from then on. Did you get it, Chico? Not really, sir. I didn't get anything at all. You are the king. Your body is your kingdom. The 100 trillion of cells that constitutes you along the childhood was in the development of the biological inevitability. At the period of adolescence, of puberty, there started to wake to your reproduction powers, and naturally you started to claim for food. You have neglected them because of your ideals, but the hunger of the sexual interchange is too strong, and the sexual mechanism claims for help. It has needs to alternate hormones, and you will have to answer it. But how? Having a senseless life? Having immoral, illegal relationships? Absolutely not. There are many kinds of functions. Among them, the function of sublimation. The organism is a self-sufficient mechanism that the king spirit can manage, manipulate through will. Because it's not the flesh that has needs. It's the soul that has yearnings, urges, desires, doubts, weaknesses, but also idealism. Once the people, yourselves, are asking for food, go to the palace balcony, talk to them, and say, I cannot give you the food that you want.
But I dedicate myself to the practice of mediumship. I work to breed lives. I work to be able to build eternal beings for humanity. Help me. Since I cannot offer you the specific food you demand from me, and as you are energy, let's transubstantiate these energies into forces for psychographies. At the moment when I'm going to dedicate myself to the mediumistic interchange, we'll be able to have the cohabitation. I will get into a trance state. You will even see my specific endocrine glands reach my nervous system, giving me vitality, thus wearing off the excess. And in this interchange of forces, all of us will enjoy peace. And how am I going to do that? Be in silence, inner silence. Go deep into the core of the being until you reach the reproductive system, and you will see that the cells move. They have consciousness. Emmanuel anticipated a notable thesis of Harvard, demonstrating that our cells are individual entities that have their own consciousness, that has the memory of reproduction to repeat always with same characteristics, conducted by the great memory of the individuality of the consciousness. Then now Chico narrates to me with his eyes brimming with tears. At the first opportunity, I got concentrated. I made this immense inner silence and started to go down slowly until the reproductive system, being able to see my organism inside and getting to the reproductive glands. I had the opportunity to see that ocean in a hubbub, the cells moving. And then he looked at me and says, girls, calm down. I will help you. Not according to what you asked me for, but according to what I can offer you. In this incarnation, I will dedicate myself to the ministry of mediumship, and I need to have strength. And you are virtually power plants. At the moment I need to work with Master Jesus, Come fulfill my needs. Come up, wear off, penetrate my brain, and run down my hands. And I talked on and realized that they started to calm down, to silence, and seemed to yield. From then on, at the moment I start to pray, I beg God to give me the dignified sex, to work with me in the mediumship, and I feel, Divaldo, a heat that comes up smoothly, taking over my body, and then the arm sets off, the mind enlarges, I get out of the body and follow what happens next to the spiritual benefactors. And since then, equipped by the Venerable Apostle, I started to try to communicate with my cells. But the only thing is that the cells from Minas Gerais are different from the ones from Bahia. Because after all, the pride that Paulistas have to picture the Baianos as if they were responsible for the disasters in their capital city, forgetting that it was the very Baianos who built it. I also would like to congratulate the Mineiros, who are also Baianos. They were Baianos who went to São Paulo and couldn't stand it. So they stayed in Minas Gerais, and there they calmly created a culture, a civilization. So the Baiana cells in me were more rebel, but I went about taming them. Talking and talking, I was dialoguing with them and receiving the energies of the transcendence to be able to transform these energy fields into forces that today are fundamental to all beings. Because sex is responsible for tragedies. If we refer to the Bible, we will see the story of Samson and Delilah, a mixture of myth and reality. It was the love of the libido, the sexual desire. We could recall Cleopatra and her eagerness for power, offering herself to Julius Caesar, the conqueror, on her boat on the waters of the Nile, having with him a son, and later offering herself again to Antonio, having twins with him, and ending the sexual experience in the terrible tragedy of the suicide of them both, in Caesar's murder, in the misfortunes that happened between Samson and Delilah, the Philistine and the Jewish. If we move a little further in history, we'll be able to see the Shakespeare's narrative about Romeo and Juliet, sparked by the love of the libido. But we can also recall the great tragedy that was the love of Abelard and Heloise. Surprised by her uncle, who sent him to be emasculated after they had had a son illegally, so he could turn into an extraordinary ethical man and could be, in the 11th century philosophy, one of the greatest thinkers after emasculation, when he chose the monastery and she chose a convent. But it was now love, mixture of libido and of infinitive tenderness. We can also recall, likewise, the platonic love of Dante and Beatrice, of the old man and the young lady who is blooming, but the sublime love of Jesus and Mary of Magdala, the tenderness of that woman who was tormented by evil spirits, and when seeing him said, "Ramone, I will give you my life." And she did, in a leprosarium, so she could depart and disincarnate in John and Mary's home in faraway lands. This transcendent love of the once harlot with the immaculate lily that on the mountain referred to the natural order of humanity. But we can also evoke this feeling of transcendent love in Francesco Bernardoni and Claire. That infinite tenderness in which the two of them unite so they can live the kingdom of heaven on earth and the true plenitude that only love can offer. But it's only natural that for us as human beings, love should play a fundamental role through which the practice of sex, yes, but the presence of love too. When we talk about the need of keeping a chaste and cautious life, we can refer to the love that unites two individuals and that takes them to strive for their own good, for the good of humanity. It's a chastity regime. Chastity, from this philosophical point of view upon which I dwell, is not the absence of the sexual union. It's not the abstinence. Because it's possible to keep the abstinence through several conflicts of the personality, through several traumas from the past, as well as from the present, and have the soul corrupted by senselessness, vulgarity, and eroticism. And we can also have a healthy relationship, have our family blessed by love. I've just referred to liberation of the sexual function. And I started to get shocked when watching some movies from the past in which the American mentality used to say, and before the sexual union, whiskey, and after that, a cigarette. So I started to see the degradation of the sexual function for the trivialization of sex nowadays. We no longer refer to eroticism, but sexism, abuse, distress. Instead of sex being prepared for life, it seems now that life has submitted to sex. People talk about virtual sex, steady sex. People talk and live only for the eroticism, and that drains the human beings and confuses them, because by exhausting this energy source of procreation, source of life, it's obvious that the individual disconnects from the basic circles of the superior spirituality and becomes nothing else but what Freud bitterly called a sexual being. We came to a point where this year, the city of Salvador, during Carnival, the city hall, that must face many problems in education, healthcare, jobs, recreation, had placed in one of the most elegant neighborhoods of the city a kind of dirigible balloon, 15 meters from the ground, so that sexual function could be practiced with the precautions so necessary today to avoid the contagion of AIDS. But what about the contagion of tuberculosis? And what about other diseases equally contagious? Aren't they as dangerous? Only AIDS is this big terror. But that dirigible was able to go down and have a couple aboard. People could choose whoever they liked to do whatever they wanted for about 10 minutes. The balloon would go up, and after 10 minutes, the individual stepped off with the most disturbing misbehavior, stimulated by drugs, but only had 10 minutes at their disposal, because the line was immense of tormented ones. To what point did our culture get to be able to practice publicly and cynically, not the sexual function, but the degenerate sex of our disturbances? So I recall a historical fact. When Claudio, the emperor, and Messalina, who became notorious for her debauchery, opted one day to give themselves into sex up to its maximum. He elected the most famous women of Rome, and she the 10 strongest legionaries. And during that night, they let themselves be dragged by the moral transgressions, by the abuse of the function. And when at dawn, He manages to get out of bed staggering, goes to see his lover wife and asks her, "So, are you satisfied?" And she replied, "No, I'm tired, because sex without love doesn't fulfill." It's exactly love that constitutes the stimulus. As we said before, not whiskey, which is vasodilator, but caress, tenderness, tenderness, this dialogue. How would I be if it weren't for your company? You are the being that God trusted me to help me if in the difficult climbing of the ascension. And the other, female or male, touched with tears in their eyes, give in the tenderness until the ecstasy. And after, not the cigarette, like someone who is free from something unpleasant, but gratitude for the rest, for the sleep that restores the strength, that helps in the phenomenon of restoration of energy. Sex is God's blessing that must be preserved with a healthy mind, without erotic movies, without the excess of the use that became the abuse. So it's necessary to put into the sexual function the presence of the consciousness. It's essential to establish that the consciousness is fundamental in the sexual practice, so we can have it free of guilt, not as escape, not as a need for self-promotion.
I often recall an old line, "Aren't you a man, pal?" And for the person to prove he was a man, he became a scoundrel. I still recall my childhood, because believe it or not, old people had childhood, although many won't believe. The first cigarette I put in my mouth, I was 5 years old. I lived in a house with a large backyard. We had harvested beans, and the peels all over the ground would roll themselves up. And I was there with a group of devilish friends. And one of them, who was 7, pulled out a peel cigarette and started to smoke. And looked at me and asked me, "Do you smoke, Givaldo?" I said, "No," because I remember my mother, who was short. And short women are terrible. The tall ones are like thunder. Lots of thunder, little rain. But the short ones already start raining. And my mother, who had green eyes, like Raul. Many times I wondered if Raul wasn't the true son and not me, because I'm terribly jealous about those eyes. And she used to see what she shouldn't, especially what she shouldn't. Then I said, "I don't smoke." And he said, "So you're not a man, because all men smoke." Then to show him I was a man, I took one of those cigarettes, put it in the mouth, and took a drag. When I dragged it, the smoke went right through my perispirit, got out through the astral body, came again and through the other side, and I got dizzy and ran straight home, calling Mom. All men screams for his mom. And when I was running towards the bathroom, she was by the door and held me by the ear. She used to say, "God gave children ears so the mother can grab them." We run past and come back on tiptoe dancing ballet. Then, thank God, at those times, there was smacking. Well, not only that. At home, my father had a psychotherapist. It was hung behind the door, and it was split in 3 parts. And when we did anything wrong, he would say, "Go fetch the psychotherapist." And during 3 minutes, there was a catharsis session, and we were cured. I could only imagine what my mother would do when she pulled me by the ear. I was pale, and she asked me, "Where are you going, young man?" I said, "To the bathroom." She said, "Go and come back." And that comeback was a tragedy, because I came back shaking, and she said, "Aha, what have you been doing, mister?" That mister wasn't meant to be a compliment, it was more like an insult. So I said, "Me? Nothing, Mom." "What do you mean, nothing?" "Where were you?" "There." "There where?" There,
Ali tem
Mom.
nome. Diga, ali, mãe.
there,
Ali
below the
tá o
cashew
menino.
tree.
Debaixo do
Who with?
cajueiro.
With the boys.
Os meninos
Which boys?
mais negrinhos.
A, B, C, D.
Fulano, Beltrano,
Doing
Ciclano,
what?
fazendo
Nothing.
nada.
Nothing. What's nothing?
Que é nada.
Well, Mom, I smoked. Oh, don't say it. Really? Smoked what? Bean straw. My God, come here, my son. I thought I calmed the old woman.
Sente aqui.
Sit
Chamou o
here.
irmão mais próximo.
She called my older brother and said, go there in the field, get all the straw you can gather and bring to me so G can smoke in front of me. And I said, Mom, I'm gonna die. She said, yes, indeed, but never more will you smoke.
O Senhor vai
Then my brother, like a typical generous brother,
generoso.
brought it and put there my fate. And then she said, smoke now. I said, Mom, there's not a lighter. She said, no problem, go and bring a torch, which are the matches of the poor. So there came my brother happily bringing a torch. She said,
A ternura do amor.
put the straw in your mouth. I said, Mom, the tenderness of love. She caressed my front head and said, my son, don't do this. Never do secretly what you cannot do in front of the others. Smoke is an addiction that kills. The individual who smokes is a suicidal person. Do you wish to commit suicide? No. So promise your mother that you will never do that again. Then I hugged this venerable woman and never indulged myself into smoking again. But then the same happened to other functions, including the sexual function. Don't give in, my son, to the aberrations. Even when your colleagues ask you to prove that you are a man going to a brothel, prove you are a man by not going. Because only the individuals who have character are the ones with the strength to say no. So it was through this school of example that the consciousness of the sexual function was born inside me. And I recall a day paraphrasing Chico Xavier when he narrated me that when psychographing, an old friend from Pedro Leopoldo came and after the session said, Chico, look how sad. I'm a prosperous man. We were classmates. I'm a pharmacist and you are nothing. You're still at the table receiving spirits for over 40 years. Leave that, Chico. There is still time for you to be happy. Look at you almost in rags. Look at me. I live in Santos. I have a building of 4 apartments. I have a pharmacy. I live in front of Gonzaga's beach. And he talked on, and Chico started to shrink like a cartoon and getting smaller and smaller. And then he said, stay well, Chico. After unloading, all those conflicts went away. Chico saw the crowd, and when he got home, Emmanuel was at the door. Chico Xavier was carrying the burden of the world, head down. Emmanuel asked him, what is that all about, my brother? Oh, my brother, you must have seen, do you remember Mr. So-and-so from Pedro Leopoldo? Emmanuel said, I remember. He's a doctor, he's a pharmacist, and I'm nothing. He said, I'm nothing, and then I'm nothing. Emmanuel said, no, he's a pharmacist. He gives prescriptions, right? Yes, he does. And you write prescriptions dictated by Dr. Bezerra de Menezes. What's the difference? You're in a better position. You send him prescriptions, and he gives them. Oh, yes. But he's married. He said he's married. But you are too. Me married? Yes, of course. You're married to Spiritism. And you have many partners. You have me, André Luiz, Maria Dolores, May. You have a large number of companions. Therefore, don't complain about loneliness. Yes, but he has 3 children. 3.
3 filhos.
And you must have got about 300. How come 300? Our books, from our psychic and sexual union. Our children were born. Those are our books. Chico once told me, "Oh, Divaldo, I wanted so much to be unhappy, but the man didn't let me." Then Chico talked on, but he has a building in Santos with 4 apartments. And you, sir, you have a house here with a hall, a kitchen, a bedroom, a bathroom. Why would a body need so much room? What's the difference? Oh, but he lives in the Gonzagas beach in front of the sea, and you live in front of the lake and hear the frogs croaking. Oh, but he has grandchildren, and you so too. Grandchildren, yes. Our translated books are our grandchildren. And let's get back to work. We don't have time to lose. Then Chico went back to work and told me I couldn't be unhappy. One day, during one of those nights, when you cannot sleep and the sister loneliness seems to get closer to us, and a transcendent need of tenderness involves us, and the wish to find somebody who can reach out was upsetting me. Joana de Angelis appeared and asked me, "What's the matter?" And I always think to myself, I cannot believe a spiritual guy doesn't know what's upsetting me. So I said, "My sister, I'm going through a crisis." "What about you, Valdo?" "Oh, I didn't even say it, but she read my thought." And then we recalled what Emmanuel told Chico. "Yes, Divaldo, you are as happy as Chico was, and all those who dedicated themselves to the good." Because Chico mentioned that that gentleman had grandchildren, but you have great-grandchildren. You have great-great-grandchildren. I said, "I do? I have them from my adopted children." She said, "No, from our transcendent sexual relationship, because our books travel, dialogue with hearts, and with all those who are fond of us and who connect with Jesus, the greatest meaning of our lives. These are our grandchildren and great-grandchildren, our great-great-grandchildren. These are the ones." Then I closed my eyes and I saw the humanity of the future, when we correct our sexual drives, when we stop being a sexual animal and use sex with wisdom. The mediums keep the sexual dignity to connect with the generous sources of life. The ordinary person, the person to love and practice, yes, the sexual function, with the sweet emotions of love. At this moment, the person will be able to say, "My God, I'm so happy. I no longer feel torment. I feel gratitude. I wish to tell you that I love life, that to me is consented. Thank you so much for the body you gave me, for the clothes that I wear, for the organism I transit. Thank you so much, Lord, for the immense opportunity to love, to be able to reproduce, to perpetuate the species in the name of your name, in the name of the Father of all of us. Thank you so much for the redeeming faith that frees my suffered soul from the abyss I threw myself into. Thank you, Lord, for the blessings of tenderness that soothe the bitterness of the heart in distress. You, who is the Son of Life, creator of the planet Earth, that you extracted from the solar nebula, come back with us, dear Lord, and make the sex function transformed into a waterfall of blessings, enrich our lives in a way that only you can vibrate in our hearts. Thank you, Lord, for the light that flows from the above, for the mercy that embraces us, for loving you with abnegation. We thank you, Lord, for these days of state conference and tell you, thank you very much because we're here. For your love, thank you, Lord. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much to you all.